If you cannot be silent, you cannot listen. And if you cannot listen, you cannot truly see. Imagine a world where everyone could be silent for 3 minutes before responding. What would change? Perhaps nothing, or perhaps everything. Have you ever asked yourself why we always turn on music when we're alone? Why does a ticking clock annoy us more than the rumble of trucks outside? Why do we fear silence more than bad news? I chose Thich Nhat Hanh's Silence, not because it's a good book, nor because it's famous. I chose it because it's dangerous. Dangerous in the way a true mirror can startle you when you look into it. The book doesn't teach you anything. It merely exposes our habit of avoiding ourselves with noise, inviting you to sit with the emptiness you've long been afraid to face. And if you only listen to a summary, you won't touch the essence of silence. That essence isn't in the content, but in the pauses between the lines, not in the theory, but in the breath of each word. This book isn't meant to be consumed, it's meant to sit beside you like an old friend. No words needed, just always there. Get the book, but don't read it hastily. Place it on your table and leave it for a few days. Then, on a weary evening, when you turn off your phone, turn off the lights, and only a soft golden glow remains from your bedside lamp, that's when you should open the first page. For now, let's explore this book together. No one truly wakes up in the morning. We simply shift the type of sound that occupies us, from the alarm clock to advertising jingles, the scroll of social media, boiling water, traffic noise, and the voices talking in our heads. If one day all those sounds disappeared, would we feel peace or panic? There is such a thing as silence, but most people don't dwell in it long enough to name it properly. They call it emptiness, disconnection, boredom. And to avoid it, they fill themselves with drip-fed information, half-baked stories, meaningless conversations. They carry a constantly playing radio, not outside, but inside their heads, and that radio has no off switch. The Zen master gives it a stark name, the NSD Nonstop Thinking radio. The scary thing isn't that it plays 24/7, but that it broadcasts the same old stuff. Fear of abandonment, endless projections, envy, self-doubt, regret, even things you thought you'd forgot. You sit there, mouth shut, no one speaking to you, yet you're flooded with sound. The master doesn't advise you to turn off the TV or throw away your phone. He asks why you refuse to stop. What are you afraid of? The quiet, or yourself within that quiet? The master recounts a story of a woman whose daughter often went to a meditation temple. The daughter invited her mother to come along, reassuring her, "Mom, you don't have to sit on the floor, there are chairs. You just need to sit still." The mother replied, "I'm so afraid of doing that." And in that painfully honest answer, a stark truth of our era reveals itself. We are afraid to sit still because when we are still, we must listen to our own hearts, and our hearts, much of the time, are a room full of unprocessed fragments. That's why people love noise. Not because it's great, but because it helps us avoid meeting ourselves. We eat out of anxiety, not hunger. We turn on music out of loneliness, not love for music. We watch things we don't need, read news we don't understand, just to avoid looking at the growing emptiness within us each day. The master doesn't use the language of a technology detractor. He doesn't oppose anything. Instead, he invites us, pay attention to what you are consuming every day. According to him, humans don't just eat with their mouths, we eat with our eyes, our ears, our minds. Everything that enters our consciousness, from news, movies, conversations, games, to endless streams of thoughts, is food. And if we don't filter, if we don't know what we're swallowing, one day we will be poisoned without realizing it. The master analyzes 4 kinds of human nutriment: material food, sense impressions, what we touch through our senses; volition, will, motivation; and consciousness, individual and collective mind stuff. And what makes us sick isn't just fast food, but toxic conversations, harmful news, depressing music, violent movies, and above all, the very thoughts we unconsciously repeat in our heads. There is a beautiful and chilling image. The master tells of a meditation student attending his first retreat. For the first 2 days, he was constantly worried about food, fearing there wouldn't be enough, that others would take his share, that he would be hungry. He always stood up before the session ended to be first in line. But by the 3rd day, after sharing and listening in a Dharma discussion group, he was late for a meal yet felt perfectly at peace. And then he realized that what made him hungry wasn't his stomach, but his anxiety. How many of our daily actions are driven by such anxiety? We don't want silence because we're afraid of finding ourselves empty. But that very emptiness is where true life begins. the master doesn't shy away from this truth. He states clearly, you cannot truly connect with the beauty of life if there is no space in your heart. If you are filled to the brim with noise, then even when walking through a field of flowers, you'll only see a need for a photo to post. If you have no room for stillness, nothing can truly penetrate you, not even love. One of the deepest paradoxes is highlighted. The more we fear loneliness, the more we try to connect, the more lost we feel. We send messages, scroll feeds, post updates, read stories, but still feel empty, because we lack the ability to sit with ourselves. And if you cannot sit quietly with yourself for 5 minutes, how can you expect anyone to stay with you for a lifetime? The master tells of children who came to Plum Village initially afraid of not having TV or games. One boy even kicked, punched, and cried in the car because he was forced to go on a retreat. But by the last day, he didn't want to leave. Nothing had changed except that he had experienced something new, presence. And this holds true for adults too. We don't need anything grand. We need to be present in a moment to breathe, to eat, to walk, to know we are alive. It all begins with a little silence. What the master points out is not mystical. He simply asks, do you want to live? If you do, start by knowing you are alive. And that only happens when you are quiet enough to hear your breath. Once accustomed to noise, silence becomes frightening. But if you move through that fear, you will meet someone you may have forgotten for a very long time, yourself. But how to begin? The master doesn't offer a 3-step formula or 5 secrets. He gently guides, just stop. Stopping is a powerful act. When we stop, we no longer chase after habits. We are no longer pulled by invisible calls. Stopping, we realize for the first time that day that we are breathing. He teaches a very simple yet profoundly transformative method, mindful breathing. Breathe in, knowing you are breathing in. Breathe out, knowing you are breathing out. That's all. No need for anything more, no need to do anything, no need to think anything. The only thing needed is to be present with your breath. Imagine someone drowning in a lake full of sounds. They struggle, overwhelmed by everything making noise. And then suddenly, they decide not to swim anymore, but to relax. They float up and are surprised to realize that on the surface of the lake, the sky is still clear, the wind still blows, and they are still alive. Mindful breathing is like that. It is a simple act that brings us back to solid ground, pulling us out of the clamor of sounds that disturb our minds. The master emphasizes that stillness is not a luxury. It's not just for monks, people with ample time, or recluses. It is a necessity, like water, like air. Without stillness, our minds will be in turmoil. Without stillness, our inner world will wither. Without stillness, love cannot blossom. He tells of a family, a young couple with 2 children who came to Plum Village for meditation practice. Initially, the wife couldn't stand the silence. She secretly called home, played music in her room, doing everything to avoid confronting the surrounding quiet. But then, one evening, returning from walking meditation, she stopped to look at the starry sky and realized that for the first time in years, her mind was no longer noisy. And then she burst into tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were droplets watering a seed that had long been left unwatered. Stillness, sometimes, doesn't need to be sought. It's right there in every step. Each time we walk, knowing we are walking, we are stepping on the path of stillness. Each time we eat, knowing we are eating in stillness. And if we are grateful for every breath, we are living in a world where noise no longer holds power. This chapter doesn't paint a soundless paradise. It doesn't fight against the modern world. It simply invites us to reclaim mastery, not allowing external noise to control our inner selves. The master doesn't tell stories to make us feel wrong. He tells them so we can realize there's another path. There's no need to abandon life, simply be present in it. And if there's a place to start, it's right now. Don't wait for the noise to disappear, because that moment will never come. Take a deep breath and then breathe out. You have just stepped into stillness. Imagine a small, wireless, buttonless radio in your head that's always on. Whether you're sleeping, eating, driving, talking to someone, or even meditating, it's broadcasting. This radio isn't playing symphonies, it's playing old, stale news. I should have done better if I had chosen a different path back then. I wonder what people think of me. Why am I not like them? I might fail tomorrow. I need to try harder. The master calls this the NSD Nonstop Thinking radio. The problem isn't that it broadcasts, but that we've grown accustomed to living in that sound, to the point where we think it's an essential part of life. You don't turn it on, but you never turn it off either. It's like a thin but persistent fog covering your mind, making every moment hazy. You sit with your son, intending to play with him, but your mind broadcasts news about how to afford next year's tuition. You gaze at flowers on the balcony, but the NSD whispers, "Is my life truly okay?" And when you lie down, that radio becomes even more active. Sometimes it doesn't just speak, it screams. The master says our mind is like a marketplace. Sellers, buyers, the clatter of knives, bargaining voices, footsteps, and the sounds of memory. True life only occasionally manages to weave its way in, like a small blade of grass growing through concrete. But we don't notice. We think the market is normal. And so we live forever in the market. Have you ever sat alone, doing nothing, just sitting, and suddenly noticed how many things are talking in your head at once? A council meeting of anxieties, a dialogue between hope and doubt, a replay of a memory from 10 years ago, mixed with the whispers of an old schoolmate named self-doubt. There are no gunshots, but our mind is a never-ending battlefield. The master doesn't use the word illness to describe this. He simply says, without mindfulness, we will be pulled along by many things. Not all thoughts are bad, but when we don't know we are thinking, thoughts control us. And the subtle point here is that the things that exhaust us the most are often the quietest. A jealous person doesn't need to scream. A fearful person doesn't need to shout. The mere operation of the NSD radio means the mind is no longer a safe sanctuary. You once thought you could control everything by thinking more, analyzing deeper, planning more meticulously. But no one told you that sometimes. Overthinking is precisely why you can't see things clearly. He says mindfulness is turning off the radio not permanently, just for a moment, like a pause in a jazz piece, allowing the entire space to resonate with stillness. At that moment, you don't just feel silent, you feel the entire world breathing a different breath. The master tells of a young woman who often dwelled on sad memories. She was frequently drawn into the past, a place of unhealed wounds. She also often thought about the future, a place full of uncertainties. The past held her back, the future pulled her forward, and the present moment, the very act of living, was crushed between those two jaws. She was not present in her own life. The NSD radio doesn't just broadcast present content, it loves the past, excels at projecting the future, but it utterly lacks the ability to live in this moment. And that's why he teaches, breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. It sounds so simple it might be boring. But try it. How many times a day are you truly aware that you are breathing? When we are present with our breath, the NSD radio weakens. Not because it's destroyed, but because we no longer allow it to manipulate us. The practice of meditation isn't to chase away thoughts, but to befriend silence. Silence, as the master writes, is not the absence of sound. It is a different kind of sound, the sound of life knowing itself to be alive. When the NSD radio is overshadowed by mindfulness, we begin to hear things that were once drowned out. Our own footsteps, the wind seeping through the window, a spoon clinking against a bowl, the gentle thud of our heartbeat against our chest, things that were always there. We just weren't quiet enough to connect with them. The master likens stillness to moonlight, gentle, uninvasive, yet illuminating the darkest corners of the mind. Sometimes we don't need advice, we just need a space to settle ourselves. And if there is any magic in meditation practice, it is that stillness heals without words. The master recounts a story of a student who suffered from depression. No medicine offered lasting effects, no therapy reached the root cause. But when this person was guided to practice stopping and listening to each breath, taking each step consciously, the first thing he said was, "I never knew I had the right to breathe like this." That's what the master does. He doesn't give you a philosophy to memorize, but offers you a space to truly live. And sometimes, what saves us isn't new knowledge, but a moment of returning to our body, returning to a long-forgotten dwelling place. The fear of stillness is a manifestation of alienation in the modern psyche. We are not just addicted to noise, we are addicted to distraction. We are addicted to the feeling of needing to do something, think something, achieve something. We are afraid of doing nothing, because that equates to uselessness. We are afraid of not thinking, because that feels empty. We are afraid of not achieving, because that means being left behind. And in that fear, we run, endlessly running, but with no destination. The master doesn't talk much about the concepts of success or efficiency, as modern society constantly repeats. He gently points out, what good is success if a person cannot sit quietly with themselves for 10 minutes? He doesn't judge, he tells stories, and in each story, we see a part of ourselves. The man who keeps the radio on all day to avoid facing himself. The woman addicted to working herself to exhaustion to avoid recalling old pain. The boy who plays games for 8 hours to forget the loneliness after his parents' divorce. All of them, and all of us, are living under the control of the NSD radio. Have you ever tried sitting next to the person you love most? Saying nothing, doing nothing, just sitting together in silence. If not, perhaps you haven't truly lived with them, because love isn't just expressed through words, it's expressed through complete presence. And that only happens when the NSD radio temporarily stops broadcasting. Stillness is not a goal, it's a condition. Just as water needs to be still to reflect clearly, the mind needs to be still to reflect life. The master doesn't paint an ideal picture. He doesn't promise that when you sit down, stillness will immediately arrive like magic. No. First, you will encounter chaos. Thoughts repressed for so long will rush out like a waterfall. You will feel torn apart. You will want to run away. And then, if you just sit there, only sit there, you will see a strange thing happen. Your mind begins to know that it is present. And in that moment, not because you are smarter, not because you have achieved anything, but simply because you are truly present with yourself, you begin to live. Somewhere in a bustling city, a man opens his refrigerator, not to get food, but just to feel that the space isn't empty, and then closes it again. He needs nothing inside. It's just the click sound as the door shuts that makes him feel less alone. Most of us are consuming not to live, but to cover up. We don't eat because we're hungry, but because we're sad. We don't scroll online because we need information, but because we're afraid of sitting still. We don't watch movies out of love for art, but because we can't bear a 10-minute gap between 2 phone calls. The master states frankly, people today fear emptiness, and the modern world is not short of sellers offering things to fill that emptiness. We are taught that if we don't have a new phone, new shoes, a new app, a new notification, life is miserable. Advertisements don't just invite, they threaten. If you don't have it, you'll be left behind. If you don't use it, you won't be happy. But what isn't said is that in the very act of unconscious consumption, we are digging a deeper well of loneliness for ourselves. After eating a bag of chips, we feel heavy. After 3 hours of gaming, we feel tired. After scrolling through hundreds of images, we feel small, inadequate, failed. Why? Because most of what we consume doesn't nourish. It separates us from ourselves. The master emphasizes that sense impressions can be as toxic as contaminated food. A fabricated news story, a provocative image, a negative word, all are nourishment that enters our minds, and unlike physical food, what we consume through our eyes, ears, and consciousness stays with us for a very long time. We eat to escape, but no one can run forever. The problem isn't what we eat, but why we eat it. He tells of someone who opens emails 100 times a day, not due to urgent work, but because they need to touch something new. But each opening brings another disappointment. What we anticipate never arrives. What we receive is another, larger void. Yet the master doesn't suggest we abandon all technology or live as hermits. He merely proposes that we reflect before we eat, watch, or read anything. Ask yourself, what do I truly need, and what am I trying to escape? That question, if answered honestly, can save a person from their own spiral. And then the master introduces a concept that can completely change how we view silence, thunderous silence. These 2 words seem contradictory. Thunder is noisy, silence is quiet. But in his usage, silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is a resounding power that needs no words. It doesn't come from avoidance, but from a profound inner strength. This silence isn't a retreat from life, but standing in the midst of life without being swept away. It is being fully present without needing to shout. It is an existence so strong that merely being present brings support to others. He speaks of a bodhisattva in the Lotus Sutra, Medicine King, who is described as someone everyone felt joy upon meeting. It's a presence that needs no language, like a child standing before a 1,000-year-old tree. They don't need to understand, just looking brings peace. The master says there are such people who don't need to preach or persuade. Their very presence is the Dharma. We can be such people, but the condition is that we must stop running, must learn to sit quietly with ourselves, and no one else can do that for us. He says that if we sit down, doing nothing, no phone, no music, just present with our breath, initially we will feel unease, panic, boredom. That's normal because we've grown accustomed to running, to noise, to distraction. But if we stay with ourselves, just for a moment, we will touch a kind of stillness that has the power to break through the shells life has created around us. That is thunderous silence. No one hears it, but it shakes the roots of all our habits. But one thing needs to be clear. Thunderous silence cannot be created by effort. It doesn't come from forcing yourself to be quiet, not from telling yourself to stop thinking, and certainly not from expecting to be as still as the Zen master. It's a state that cannot be forced, it can only be allowed. Just as the surface of a lake cannot be forced flat, it only becomes flat when the wind ceases. The master says, "Be the moon that illuminates, not a flashlight shining in." This means don't force yourself to understand or fix your mind. Illuminate it with gentle presence, a presence not to repair, but to witness. Like a friend sitting beside someone in pain, saying nothing, doing nothing, just being there. And that presence in itself has the power to heal. The hardest thing isn't practicing silence. The hardest thing is believing that silence has value. In a world where the loudest voices win, the fastest talkers win, and those who react a lot are seen as intelligent, silence is easily perceived as defeat. But thunderous silence is not a retreat. It is the strength of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. He tells of a meditation student who initially came to a retreat just to try it out. He had many opinions about how to sit, how to do walking meditation, how to eat in silence. He found it odd, a waste of time. But then one rainy day, he walked back to the meditation hall alone. There was no one else, just the sound of the rain and his breath. And for the first time, he realized he had never truly lived before. Everything prior was just a reaction, living like a machine powered by anxiety. And then he didn't need anyone to explain anymore. He understood with his body, not his head. The master doesn't try to convince us, he invites us to experience. Because truth is never conveyed through words, it is only touched through presence. And that presence cannot exist when the NSD radio is operating, when external and internal noise dominates. Thunderous silence, therefore, is a presence both invisible and explosive. It cannot be seen with the eyes, but everyone can feel it, just as you might step into a room and feel at ease. Not because the room is beautiful, but because the person sitting there possesses something unnamed. It is a stillness that has permeated every cell of their being, and they don't need to do anything to spread it. They just need to be present. Stillness is not a technique. It is a way of life. Living with less noise, living with fewer reactions, living with awareness of every action. Not just during meditation, but while washing dishes, folding clothes, opening a door, walking. Every action, if done mindfully, is a drop of stillness. He calls it meditation in action. You don't need to sit cross-legged to meditate, you just need to be truly present when listening to others, present when eating, present when bathing. Present when sad, present when tired. And gradually, like water seeping into the earth, stillness will become your natural state. No longer will you have to try, no longer will you need reminders. You become a person who, upon entering a room, brings a natural calm to others. Everything we seek outside is already within us. Forgotten by the noise, thunderous silence is not found in mountains or forests. It doesn't require bells or gongs. It lies in the ability to stop, to look deeply, and to be fully present. That is something no one can give us and no one can take away. It is within us like a mountain, like a lake, like a star that always shines, no matter how many layers of clouds obscure it. In a world where everyone talks, listening seems to be a forgotten art. People nowadays don't truly listen to each other. We just wait for the other person to finish so we can say our part, and even while they are speaking, we've already prepared our response. Dialogue is no longer two rivers converging, but two spears constantly clashing. Master says, we often don't listen to each other because our minds are always full of noise, and not just external noise like TV, car horns, phone notifications, but also internal noise, prejudices, expectations, memories, and unhealed wounds. We don't just listen with our ears, we listen with our entire history. A remark from our mother, if heard on a different day, in a different state of mind, might be gentle, but if heard when we are vulnerable, it can become a knife. Therefore, listening is not merely receiving sounds. Deep listening is an act of love. The master says there are people who suffer so much they cannot express it in words. If they are not listened to with their whole heart, they will close up forever. But if someone just sits there, without judgment, without explanation, without interrupting, just being present, that is medicine no other remedy can replace. Deep listening doesn't require a reply. Sometimes a nod, a mindful breath, an understanding gaze is salvation. Because suffering people don't need to be fixed, they need to be seen. Just as a tree doesn't need advice, it just needs water. The master teaches that listening is giving the other person space. In that space, they can breathe, they can let go, they can simply be themselves. But to listen to others, we must first stop being controlled by the voices in our own heads. If our hearts are full of anger, disappointment, comparison, there's no way to truly receive anyone. We will hear through a distorted lens. And what we hear isn't the other person, but our own imaginings. When you listen to someone, imagine yourself as an empty cup holding nothing, mixing nothing in, stirring nothing up, just receiving. That cup doesn't judge, it just is present. The master tells of a meditation student who was very argumentative, skilled at debating. When he heard something, he immediately had a counterargument. But when invited to practice listening, not speaking, just breathing and listening, he couldn't stand it. After 3 minutes, he became restless and uncomfortable because, throughout his life, he was used to being right. He didn't know how to listen without reacting. And then, on the 5th day of the retreat, he burst into tears. He said, "For the first time, I listened to my wife tell a story without interrupting, and I realized I had never truly heard her. He was present in the house, at meals, in the bedroom, but not in her heart. And now, the only thing he could do was to be silently present. That is the core of deep listening, not listening to reply, but listening to understand. And understanding here isn't understanding a problem, but understanding a human being. But to be able to listen to others with an open heart, we need to do something even harder: listen to ourselves. And this is where most people fail. Not because they don't want to understand others, but because they cannot bear to look within. The master doesn't hide the truth that each person's inner world is an untamed forest, with cool shade and singing birds, but also with thorns, muddy bogs, and sometimes even deep chasms. If we lack the courage to sit in that forest, we will live our entire lives on the periphery, where there is only the agitation of fear and escape. Therefore, he teaches us to start with a breath. No need to try and solve all wounds. Just sit with them like an old friend. When sad, don't try to be happy. Breathe and say, "Hello, sadness, I see you." When angry, don't try to suppress or scream. Breathe and say, "Hello, anger, I will sit here with you for a while." This seemingly small act, sitting still without avoiding, is a kind of deep listening. The master shares that many people think they are listening, but in reality, they are manipulating the conversation. They ask to lead. They nod to be acknowledged. They listen to find flaws. But if we approach the other person with that mindset, we are hurting them without realizing it. He tells a poignant story. A father, after many years of conflict with his son, came to Plum Village to practice meditation. During that time, he didn't say much. He just learned to breathe, to sit still, to listen without interrupting. On the last day, he called his son without reproach, without defensiveness, simply saying, "Son, I'm sorry. I want to listen to you. Truly listen." The other end of the line was silent for a very long time, and then there was only a soft breath. No grand reconciliation speech, just two people, for the first time in years, truly present with each other. The master calls that the miracle of listening, needing no intellect, no degrees, no elaborate words, just the presence of love. And then he speaks of a deeper aspect. Listening is not just an art of healing, but also a spiritual act. Because when we listen without judgment, we are touching our egoless nature. We are no longer the I that needs to be right. We are no longer the I that is hurt. We are just an empty field where the other person's voice can enter and stay. In that moment, we are no one and also everyone. He writes, "When you listen to someone with an unentangled heart, you are no longer just yourself. You are all your ancestors. You are the entire stream of life learning to love again. And if you ever thought you weren't capable of doing something meaningful, try truly listening to one person. You will see that in this world, there is nothing more precious than someone who knows when to be silent at the right time so that the other person can breathe." Deep listening doesn't require technique. It just needs an empty heart and a full presence. Have you ever walked into a room where no one spoke a word, but you clearly felt something was amiss, or stepped into a corner of a garden with no bird song, no breeze, and felt your heart swell with an unnamed peace? The master calls that the power of stillness. A silence that is not weak at all. A silence where every molecule within it is filled with life. Silence is the essential space for healing, just as light is needed for trees to grow, as air is needed for lungs. Silence is the fundamental condition for the mind to breathe. But the problem is, most of us don't correctly understand silence. We think it's avoidance, shyness, lack of action. But the truth is the opposite. Stillness requires courage. It is the space where we confront ourselves, without defense, without justification, without pretense. In daily life, silence is often distorted into two forms, either suppression or fear. There are families where, after every argument, a heavy silence descends. No one speaks, but everyone suffers. That silence doesn't nourish. It's like a vault of toxic gas that no one dares to open. Conversely, there are times when silence is a conscious choice. Not because we don't know what to say, but because we know that speaking isn't always the way to connect. The master tells of a time he sat outdoors, amidst nature, with no conversations, no technology, no notifications interrupting, just small flowers gently opening, the wind rustling through branches, distant bird calls. And in that listening, the master said it wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of a very deep sound. The power of stillness doesn't come from negating sound, but from being fully present with whatever sound is present. When you hear the wind with your whole being, with nothing interfering, nothing needing to be thought, that is when stillness appears. Stillness doesn't demand that you withdraw from the world. It merely invites you to return to yourself. And then the master goes even further. Silence is the foundation of deep insight. If you keep talking, keep explaining, keep arguing, you leave no space to see the truth. Just as disturbed water cannot reflect clearly, a mind filled with incessant talk cannot see deeply. He quotes Confucius, "Heaven says nothing, yet the four seasons run their course." But anyone who has truly listened to the sky on a real dawn knows that some things can only be heard in silence. Once the master organized an outdoor meal with hundreds of people, monastics and lay practitioners, and no one spoke. They sat in circles on the grass, eating in silence. At first, there was some commotion, clinking dishes, movement. But when the mindfulness bell rang, everyone stopped. In that moment, silence became a living entity, everyone breathed together. And that very breath, without words, created a collective energy field that the master called thunderous silence. The power of stillness doesn't come from the number of people, it comes from the depth of presence. He shares an old experience from a retreat in Chiang Mai, Thailand. He was near a stream, listening to the water flow day and night. And then one day, the stream froze, the sound of water vanished, and in that emptiness, he realized the sound of no sound. The sound of something never heard before, yet touching the depths of consciousness. That no sound isn't an empty space. It's the voice of the earth, the whisper of the universe, the language of things too vast to name. The master recounts a time he stood in the middle of a bustling train station, people crowding, train whistles, footsteps, announcements echoing everywhere. Yet amidst all that chaos, he felt a profound stillness. Not because the outside suddenly became quiet, but because the inside was no longer agitated. His mind was calm, and from there, everything became clear like a photograph in perfect focus. That is the true power of stillness. It doesn't demand circumstances, it creates circumstances. If you ever thought you needed your own mountain to practice or an absolutely quiet meditation room to connect with your inner self, you are mistaken. Space does not dictate stillness. Only a present mind opens that door. The master says, when your mind is still, you will see the true nature of life without needing any additional sound. He emphasizes that stillness should not be separated from daily life. Many people think practicing means withdrawing from society, going to a temple, meditating all day. But he invites us to practice amidst life, to practice in the marketplace, to find stillness right amidst the sounds of motorcycles, children's voices, arguments, not to escape, but to be deeply present within what is. Because meditation doesn't begin when you sit down. It begins when you are willing to stop running. And stillness doesn't come by rejecting sounds, but by accepting them without reacting. When a car horn no longer startles us, when a phone bell no longer pulls us away from ourselves, that's when stillness has taken root. The master tells of an old teacher who, every morning, would sit drinking tea in his yard, saying nothing, just looking at the sky. A young student, seeing this, asked, "Master, are you meditating?" The teacher smiled and replied, "I am living." This very simplicity is what surprises people. Stillness needs no rituals. It doesn't require candles, bells, or meditation music. Sometimes it comes while washing dishes, while hanging clothes, or when you suddenly stop in a familiar alley and see sunlight piercing through the leaves, so peaceful that you can hear your heartbeat more clearly than ever before. The master calls that a moment of no sound, but full of speaking. And in those moments, life speaks without words. Stillness can be an act of resistance when the world demands we react quickly, reply immediately, speak constantly. Each time we choose not to react, each time we stop to breathe, to return within, is a time we affirm that we are not products of external stimuli. He shares, true life is only present when we stop. And if someone asks, what should I do with my life? Perhaps the deepest answer is, be present with it. A person sits by a stream, doing nothing, thinking nothing, trying nothing. And then the water flows, the wind blows, the trees sway, everything remains the same. But for the first time, that person feels they belong to this world completely. That's when stillness is no longer a goal. It becomes the unchanging foundation upon which everything unfolds. Amidst the myriad noises and temptations of the modern world, there is a silent yet deeply transformative power: mindfulness. But mindfulness is not concentration to achieve a goal. It is not a mental tightening to race against time. According to the master, mindfulness is the act of returning. Returning to oneself, to the present moment, to the breath without purpose, without craving. He writes, the more frequently we return to our true home, the more time we spend practicing mindfulness, the more conscious we become of our suffering. And that is the crucial point. Mindfulness is not to avoid suffering, but to gently and presently contact it. The Master does not invite us to become a warrior against suffering. He invites us to become a companion to suffering. Because, according to him, without suffering, we cannot grow into human beings. That is a paradox that makes us shudder. We often think happiness means no suffering. But the Master points out that suffering is the material for us to blossom. Mindfulness, therefore, is not an outward action. It is a returning movement, returning to look directly at what we once avoided. Old wounds, unforgiven things, voices still murmuring in our minds like the NSD radio that never turned off. He says, we have a natural tendency to want to escape suffering. And indeed, we turn on music when our hearts are empty, we turn on the TV when we're alone in the house. We seek someone to talk to when we can't bear the echo of our own minds. But all these escapes are ultimately detours leading back to suffering, this time deeper. Mindfulness invites us to do what few dare. Sit still amidst suffering, not running away. Not to surrender, but to transform. Because, according to the Master, if we do not acknowledge suffering, it will continue to grow in the dark like an abandoned child. Suffering does not need to be solved, it needs to be embraced with presence. And that is the work of mindfulness, illuminating the darkness not to make it disappear, but so it is no longer alone. He offers a simple practice. Breathe in and silently say, I see my suffering. Breathe out, I embrace my suffering. That's all, nothing more needed. It's just a small phrase. But if done with complete presence, it can thaw a region of the mind that has long been frozen solid. Mindfulness, as the Master shares, is not at all like the tension often seen in workaholics. It doesn't narrow us, it expands us. It doesn't tire us, it helps us breathe. It doesn't force, it invites. Because, in its essence, mindfulness is an act of love. We can only truly be mindful when we have love for ourselves. The Master tells of a young mother who constantly felt guilty for not being able to fully care for her child at home because there were too many tasks to do. But one day, she was guided to practice 5 minutes of mindfulness with her child. No phone, no housework, no multitasking, just 5 minutes sitting with her child, listening, watching, and breathing with her child. In those 5 minutes, she realized that what her child needed wasn't for her to do a lot, but for her to be truly present, mindful. Mindfulness, therefore, is the greatest gift we can give to someone, and also the most precious gift we can give to ourselves. He says many people die without ever having lived because, throughout their lives, they were not present in what they were doing. They eat while thinking about deadlines. They shower, but their minds are on an unanswered email. They chat, but their eyes are still darting to their phones. They live in a dream of distraction, and the Master doesn't blame them. He simply asks a question: what percentage of your life are you truly living in it? That question doesn't accuse, it invites us to return, not with a promise, but with the next breath. Because mindfulness begins the moment we know we are alive, know we are walking, breathing, eating. No monastery needed, no bells or gongs, just a moment of stopping. And the miracle is that when we are mindful, everything comes alive. Eating a bite of rice, knowing you are eating it, that grain of rice is different. Hearing a bird's song without judgment, that sound resonates further. Looking at someone without labeling, that gaze touches deeper. That is the magic of mindfulness, making small things sacred. The master speaks of walking, not walking to get somewhere, not for exercise, not for weight loss, just walking. And knowing you are walking, placing your feet on the ground as if each step is a sacred contact with Mother Nature. And each such step, if done with mindfulness, can free us from all anxieties. Because in that moment, we are not pulled by the future, not dragged back by the past. We are living, and living can only happen in this present moment. Mindfulness is not willpower training. It is a gentle return, like water flowing around rocks, like sunlight soaking into grass. No fighting needed, just presence. And anyone can do that, no matter where they are, what they are doing, or who they are. If you don't have mindfulness, you will never truly live. And that is the greatest loss, not losing money, losing people, losing status, but losing the life unfolding right before your eyes. Walk as if each step is a kiss for the earth. Have you ever felt that you talked a lot, but no one truly listened? Or remained silent for a long time, yet in your heart, a desperate cry echoed, "Understand me." In the age of technology, where we can text someone halfway across the globe in a second, never before in human history have people been so lonely. We have enough devices to connect, but we utterly lack the ability for true communication. And the sad truth is that precisely because we don't know how to communicate correctly, how to listen deeply, we keep hurting each other without realizing it. Every unmindful word is an arrow. Every ignorant silence is a wall. The master doesn't begin by teaching us how to speak correctly. He starts from a deeper place, the suffering in the heart that isn't understood, and from that, it transforms into disconnection between spouses, between parents and children, between friends, between nations, and then between ourselves and ourselves. When communication is impossible, energy becomes blocked like a river that's dammed, the water no longer flows, and from there, everything decays. The master calls this the illness of communication, and we are gravely ill. He says that sometimes, just a timely hug can prevent someone from falling into despair. But often, we are physically together yet feel like we're in two different worlds because everyone has too much noise in their heads. Everyone is rushing, everyone needs to speak, but they don't know how to truly speak, how to truly listen. Mindful speech and compassionate listening are the two wings of authentic communication. Mindful speech doesn't mean speaking gently in a fake way or choosing words to be easily heard. It means speaking what truly needs to be said with an open heart, without accusation, without blame, without pointing a spear at the other person, but rather, "These are my feelings, I am suffering and I need you to understand." But to speak like that, we need inner space. If our heart is full of anger, we will speak anger. If our heart is full of self-doubt, we will speak defensive words. If our heart is full of fear, our words will be full of trembling. Therefore, before speaking, breathe. Before speaking, take 3 breaths, return to yourself. Place your hand on your heart and ask, will these words bring understanding and love? If not, then don't speak. The opposite of mindful speech is compassionate listening, an seemingly passive act, yet no less powerful. The master says, when someone is suffering, what they need most isn't advice, but a heart that knows how to listen without judgment. But that's very difficult because when we listen, our first instinct is to respond, to fix, to explain. We bring our entire system of beliefs, experiences, and opinions into our ears, and from that, we no longer truly hear. We are merely reflecting our own ego. Compassionate listening is to empty your mind, not to criticize, not to interrupt, not to try and fix, just to sit there like the moon silently illuminating the dark night, allowing the other person the chance to simply be themselves. He tells of a young boy in a family retreat. He seemed very aggressive, often yelling, reacting strongly, being destructive. But when a nun sat and listened to him without scolding him or forcing him to be good, just listening, he burst into tears. And for the first time, he said, "I just want Mom and Dad not to leave me at school anymore." It turns out that anger was a shell protecting the fear of abandonment. Many adults are just like that. We can't express what we truly need. We only show it through blame, through silence, through anger. And so communication breaks down. The speaker doesn't say what they truly mean, and the listener doesn't hear what is truly being said. The master emphasizes that all suffering has roots, and listening is a small spade that digs down to that root. If you dig with compassion, you will find the seed. If you dig with prejudice, you only harden the soil. He advises everyone to practice communication letters. A letter written with all your stillness, not sent to demand, not to prove who is right or wrong, but simply an honest sharing. I have suffered, I have not understood, I want to understand you, I am ready to listen. That letter doesn't necessarily have to resolve things. Sometimes just one sentence, if written with a present heart, can shatter a wall built over 10 years. The master tells of a married couple who were on the verge of divorce. They lived in the same house, raised their children, but no longer spoke anything truly meaningful to each other. In a retreat, the husband was invited to write a letter to his wife. In the letter, he didn't complain or accuse, he just wrote, "I'm sorry for not understanding you. I am ready to listen if you want to share. Just tell me and I will sit still." The wife read the letter, quietly weeping, and that was the beginning of a return. No need for eloquent words, just sincere heart. Communication must be not a skill but a spiritual act. Because when we truly understand someone, we transcend our ego to touch the other person's true self. And in that moment, there is no longer I and you, only we. Speak words that can make flowers bloom in the hearts of others. And if one day you don't know what to do to save a cracking relationship, try starting with 1 minute of silence, and from there, create something that truly comes from the heart. Perhaps if you have listened to the very last seconds of this book's silence, I don't need to thank you in the usual way anymore. Instead of saying thank you, I just want to invite you to take a slow, deep breath, not to do anything, just to realize that we are still here, in this strange moment between noise and silence, between a world constantly broadcasting and a heart learning to stop. Stillness doesn't promise to bring you immediate peace, nor does it force you to meditate every morning. It doesn't give you a formula, but only draws you a door. To open it or not, to step through it or not, is your choice. And if one day you feel so tired that you don't want to do anything, remember that doing nothing can also be an act full of love. If this book has touched you somewhere, even just a small part, please share it, but don't share it with me. Share it with your future self through a note, a comment, a genuine response. It doesn't need to be beautiful, just true. You can write down your feelings, a passage you want to keep, or a paradox that confused you. Everything is accepted because everything you feel is alive. And if you have a book waiting to be heard, tell me. Not because I know everything, but because I want to sit down with you, open the book, and be silent together. Sometimes the storyteller doesn't need many words, just to turn a page with you and sit together for a moment. Thank you, not because you listened, but because you were present. And if there is any book, sad or confusing, thin or thick, famous or forgotten, that you want me to narrate, don't hesitate to drop it into the mailbox. Who knows, it might be the next song of stillness being written. See you on the next page or in the very silence after this period.